What's up, guys? So I've been asked to explain some things, and I'm going to try to do my best to do that. And also in this video, I'm going to have a little bit of an experiment where I try to show some of the things I'm talking about. Although it's not great, it's something. So what sounds better? What gets louder? What plays lower? Depending on where your subwoofer is. And we're talking about SUVs, trunk, cars, mainly stuff like that, hatchbacks. So where do you put your speaker at? Where do you put the subwoofer at? Do you fire it forward? Do you fire it backwards? Okay, so let's cover that in the basics. First of all, you're going to get the lowest response, not the loudest. You're going to get the lowest response by firing your subwoofer toward the back. Simply because the sound wave is the longer sound waves will have time to develop. So from the time, assuming that this is your where your back seat is, your back of your back seat, right? So if you got your subwoofer mounted back here and it's firing toward the back, now the sound wave comes out of the subwoofer, goes to the back of the car, bounces off that, comes back forward, and has all that length from here to here to here, so you can get the longest sound wave in there. That means you're going to play the lows better. Whereas if you have the subwoofer here, the box here, and the speakers are right here, now your sound wave is going from here to here. It's a much shorter distance, and that means you're going to be able to play slightly higher notes at louder, but you're not going to be able to play the lows as well. That's the first thing. That's why you're flipping it forward or flipping it backwards is going to play two different sets of frequencies better than others. Which one's louder? It depends on which frequency you're trying to meter. Okay? That's the simple facts. Now, also, if you're doing DB drag racing, typically your meter is located here. And so to get the furthest away from your meter you can, you want your speakers over here in this corner. So your meter's in this corner, your speakers are in this corner, you have this long diagonal line that you can project into. So if you turn your box on an angle, fire your subs or your port into this corner, now you're doing the bounce thing where you're bouncing off the corner. You're also corner loading and grouping it up, and then you're shooting it all a very long distance back to this corner, and that's going to give you the most lows and the most volume at that spot right there. All right, so if you're trying to load for a meter in a trunk, that's pretty much how you do it. But if you're wanting to listen to bass and you're wanting to build lows in this whole front area where your people are, right, then having the box firing straight back is going to load that front more evenly. You're still going to have some corner loading happening because bass likes to group up in corners and create intensity. That's why you want the window up on the meter side, so that you can load that corner with sound pressure waves. I know, it's a lot of complicated stuff going on. The other thing is whether or not if you have a subwoofer firing forward, you can add a wall. If you wall it in the trunk at the back, where the back of the back seat is, or wall it at the C pillar, or wall it at the B pillar, now you've changed the shape of the entire room. Before, you were using the room to bounce things off of, and sometimes the room was helping, sometimes the room is hurting. But whenever you wall it and you put your subs in this wall, now you've changed the entire shape of this room. So first thing you're going to do is build more pressure because it's a smaller space to pressurize. That means you're going to get more wind and more intensity. All right. Second thing you're going to do is you're going to isolate it and keep the sound waves from getting behind the wall and getting lost back here where they're not being listened to. You're going to keep them confined to this area. Now you may say, well, that's a shorter distance now. The lows aren't going to play. Well, we can do full length sine waves. We can also do half waves and quarter waves and eighth waves. And whichever one you get to line up with from your sub to your listening position or to your metering position is going to be intense. So by adjusting where that wall is, and all of these different elements, you can pick that meter, you can pick that frequency, or you can just look at what frequency is there, right? What frequency is going to hit, and then you can build around it. You can either build to that frequency to make it super loud at 38 hertz, but crap everywhere else, or you could build around the frequency and let that peak carry that frequency, and you could tune a different area to cover that and boost it some to make more of a flat response curve. There's so many different elements, but check out this little experiment that's coming up, and you can kind of get a visual of what I've been talking about. So let's talk about sound waves in a car. Now imagine the Tupperware dish is the car, and the spot on the left over there is the back of the car. The spot on the front is the right of the car. I'm going to do several little demonstrations here. So pay attention to how the sound waves or the water waves interact with each other, front to back in the corners, and right about 1/3 of the way from the windshield back. Basically, it all depends on so many things about your car. How the sound is going to interact and how the bass is going to react being in different locations. But the fact is, if you want a wave to form that's long enough for deep bass notes, the further back you get away from the listening position with your subwoofer, the longer you're going to have for that wave to mature. But you can also do portions of it. For example, a half of a wave, or a quarter of a wave, or an eighth of a wave. Those are all going to create intermittent spots where you can get lots of intense sound at that frequency. So it's all going to depend on, like everything, having something located in the passenger seat can change how it sounds in the driver's seat. Having the passenger seat lean forward can change how it sounds. There's just an infinite amount of possibilities when it comes to that. So if we're talking about a trunk situation where you have a trunk on your vehicle and your subwoofer is located back there, most of the time you'll find that rear facing the subs or firing them into the corner by that red cup there is going to net you the best response on the glass on the other corner. That's because those two corners are the furthest away from each other, and that corner opposing, directly diagonally opposing that red cup corner is where the meter's going to be. But if you're just talking about bass and how it sounds in the front of the vehicle, it's not as big of a deal. In this case right here, I'm going to illustrate what happens whenever you have a sealed off environment or close to it from the back of the car. You'll notice how much different the waves act whenever they come from this. They're going to maintain a nice smooth alignment, move forward in a nice smooth way, and then come back and interfere in the same spot, which is right about where the driver's seat is. If you pay attention to where these waves interact with each other, it's pretty close to the passenger compartment. Up there at the very end is up in the dash windshield area. So depending on how long these waves are, how slow I'm moving this, is going to dictate where they interfere. A faster wave is going to interfere further up, but a longer wave or a slower wave is going to interfere further back. If you find the exact right speed or right frequency, you can have the wave hitting the end and coming back and meeting the other wave dead center, about right there where it's at now. So it all depends on the frequency that you're playing too, where it's going to generate the most pressure. And right where those waves are interfering, you're either going to get a null or a boost. So if the waves are both at the same point in the peak, when they hit, you're going to get a boost. But if one of the waves is on the downslope and one of them is on the upslope, you're going to get a null, meaning it's not going to make much sound. All of these are variables, and you can see how these waves are continuing to interact with each other. The sides of the vehicle, protuberances coming into the cabin, flexible materials on the sides, all of these things are going to change how these waves behave in a vehicle. Let's look at another one. Now this is a scenario where we have a box located, say forward of the trunk a little bit with space behind it where sound can escape. Now, these tests don't all work great, so bear with me. Try to glean what information you can from them, as poorly done as they are. But I'm creating a little subwoofer action right here in front of this enclosure to try to emulate what would happen to a sound wave if the box has got a big leaky area behind it where the sound can go. And of course, this is all going to vary depending on everything. But in front of that box, you see the sound behaves pretty much normal coming off the front of the speaker. But you'll quickly see stuff coming in from the sides. That reverberation coming in from the sides is causing nulls and peaks all over the place. It's a very messy environment to try to create sound pressure. There's so many different variables happening here that it can either be good or bad. And what's going to vary is going to be whether it's loud at certain frequencies but not as loud at others. I know it's a terribly interesting experiment, and it's hard to see what's happening behind the box because I'm in the way. But there is a reaction back there. It's causing the change in the front. So you got your normal wave coming off the front with the piece that I'm making for the subwoofer, but you got all these pieces coming back from the rear that are coming up front and causing these weird disturbances. So now let's look at a similar experiment without the box in place with just the speaker. This would be like a free air kind of a situation with no baffle whatsoever. Now a couple of things are going to happen as I move forward in the pulse on that speaker. You're going to have water moving away from it, but you're also going to have water going in behind to fill in the gap. And that's going to create a negative void back there. Now you've got a positive wave and a negative wave. And that negative wave comes around the sides of the baffle and goes out. That's kind of acting like a port. Well, that negative wave, if it happens to line up with that positive wave at some point, you get a boost. If it doesn't line up with the positive wave, if it's halfway in the middle, then you get a null. So depending on the frequency this driver's moving and how far it is from the back and about 100 other things, we may get a boost from this or we may get a negative from this. It's kind of interesting because it really does act like a subwoofer with ports on either side. As you're moving that pressure backwards and then it's spilling around the side, and it's kind of creating the same effect as you would have a port there. Of course, its tuning is all weird because it's huge, but I just thought it was interesting. Thought maybe you guys might get a kick out of seeing some of the things I mess around with to figure things out. This is kind of experimentation that I do.